Hey folks, I'm glad you're here today. Let me get a big ack on the questions that are in the chat that you can hear me from someone. It works, it works. Yep, I got an ack. Excellent, excellent. It is 1 o'clock right now, East Coast time. I'm glad you're all here. My name is Paul Merrill. I'm from Beaufort Fairmont Test Automation. We focus on test automation. We do a lot of that. We do consulting, training, and we also do some staffing in the IT world. So we started that about several years ago, and we're focusing more on it now because we're getting a lot more requests for it. Make sure to reach out to us if you've got positions that you're interested in filling. We'd love to help you out. We're very good at that, along with test automation. If you have interest in test automation, reach out to us about that as well. My name is Paul Merrill. I'm the founder of Beaufort Fairmont. We're based in Cary, North Carolina. I'm glad you're with us today. You've got my information here on the screen. Hopefully you can see my screen and see that we have my Twitter handle and the name of this particular presentation, which is the first one that I'm doing in about 4 or 5 months. So let's see if I'm up to par. I don't know, I'm kind of out of practice here, so let's see. So contract testing with Pact. Today we're going to do several things. One part of this is going to be a workshop. We're going to do an overview first, and then we'll do a workshop. And at the end, I'll ask for any questions. So the workshop is something you're welcome to follow along with once we get going. I've got the link here for you to go grab it from GitLab. Take a look at that, and there is a README file there, and you can start following along with the setup. I'm not expecting you all to do this, but if you happen to be pretty good at JavaScript, you know Node and NPM and that kind of stuff, and you want to dive in, this is where you dive in. And of course, this is recorded as always, so you can always come back to this. Go out to the workshop, go out to the README file on GitLab, take a look, work through it on your own anytime you want. And if you have questions, you can always reach out to me either through Twitter, dpaulmerrill, or paul@beaufortfairmont.com. With that said, I'm going to keep this link on the next 3 or 4 slides in case you haven't typed it in yet and in case you want to follow along in this workshop. And as you get set up with that, I'll tell you several things. Number one, it is JavaScript intensive. So if you're not familiar with JavaScript, this probably isn't the best fit for you to do right now, live in real time. Number two, I'm not going to be able to answer questions about getting you set up right now. Afterwards, if you'd like to talk through that, I can do it then. But for the majority of people, I think they're going to be taking a look at this and watching what I'm doing rather than trying to go through it on their own. And that's perfectly fine. So I'll keep this link up on the next few slides so that you can take a look, okay? So some of you know I do the B list every single month. And the B list is my way of saying thank you to certain people who have been especially helpful over the last month. And I don't always get every single name. I don't always remember every person that's helped me, but I just want to make sure that I take a moment. It's really more for me than it is for you guys, I think. I'm not sure. But for me, it forces me to take a moment and think about all the people in the last month that I can think of that have helped me or Beaufort Fairmont out in some way. And your honor is getting to be a part of the B list and on this recording forever. So if that looks like your name and you think we've talked recently, it probably is you, okay? So thank you very much for whatever it is you did. Upcoming, a couple things upcoming. So number one, I'm really excited about this. Angie Jones asked me to be on Test Automation U. And my first class on there is for Robot Framework. It's called an Introduction to Robot Framework. It's excellent. It's a scaled down version of my 5-day course that we offer with Beaufort Fairmont. It could actually be 4 days probably if we squeeze it down a little bit more, but it's Introduction to Robot Framework. Requires no programming experience. The main things that you need to know how to do are edit a text file, work at the command line, install a few things, and you should be good to go with that. So it's going to be great. It's coming out hopefully this week as soon as I get a chance to go in and do the final review before it's published. If you don't know Test Automation U and you like to learn and you like to up your game with Test Automation U is a great place to do it. Take a look at all of the courses out there. They have certifications in different courses and different lines of thinking and different lines of education. It's a wonderful, wonderful place to be. And some of the best known speakers and instructors in test automation in the world are on Test Automation U. So make sure to take a look at that if you haven't already. New courses almost every day. AI in testing. I've got 2 new articles coming out on Test Beacon, which is going to be really fun. I took another deep dive into AI and AI in testing and found some pretty fun stuff. So I've gone out and created, one of them is these are the best resources for you to learn about AI within testing. And then the next one is going to be about kind of what AI in testing is and how to get involved in it. Some pretty cool tools there. I found some cool tools on Google, and Google has experiments out there with AI that are pretty fun to look at. So make sure to keep an eye on that particular site, TechBeacon. And TechBeacon is always good to me. They're always good to the testing community. So you can go there and learn a lot as well. I'm looking for folks, okay? I'm looking for this one. I've been looking for this one hard. We've put out an all points bulletin, you could say, for this one. A principal web performance engineer. And what this is, of course, it's remote. Everything is remote these days, but I prefer North Carolina, Colorado, Illinois, or Florida. Other places are more than welcome. Has to be in the United States. But what I'm looking for on this one, this is a top of the industry kind of thing. This is the kind of person who knows engineering, software engineering, with JavaScript frameworks on the front end, inside and out, can code up a storm. This is not a performance testing role. This is a performance web engineering role. So if you are really good at helping developers tune their code in React and other frameworks like that, if you really know all the depth of performance that there is on the front end, that's what I'm looking for here. Make sure to reach out to me about that. Another one, I'm always looking for great people with a number of different skills. If you are in testing, if you're a test manager, if you're a software engineer, make sure to take a look at our website, and I'm going to give you the link here in just a minute to go and apply. And make sure to look at the link while your manager is not looking at you if you're in a conference room, although nobody's doing that these days, right? Everybody's remote. So you can just take the picture or look at the recording. So remote, this is an opportunity to be an architect with Robot Framework. It's a little different than some other things that we've talked about. If you're really, really good with Robot Framework, give me a yell. I'd like to get you involved in this and have you help one of our clients who needs some ramping up in Robot Framework. I mentioned recruiting and staffing. Make sure to reach out to us with that. And I also mentioned, before we get going here, I mentioned about applying. So hopefully you can see my screen. I'm going to copy this into the chat down here and send it out to all of you, this link. There you go, apply for jobs. So it's beaufortfairmont.com/about/apply for jobs. And you should be able to find it in here to improve your work life. That's where it is. Go to this page, fill in which position you want, and we hope to get back to you when we find a match for you. So give me a yell about that. And let's get going with this. Thank you very much. If you have questions as we go along, if you have any thoughts as we go along, please feel free to type them into the chat or into the questions section of your interface there. And let's get started with Pact. So first of all, if you were here, I'd ask you, what do you know about Pact? What do you know about contract testing? But you're not here. So you're welcome to share with me in the questions if you'd like. But I'm going to go along with this and let's just dive in. We've got a lot to cover. So contract testing. Contract testing is the idea that, that there is an agreement between pieces of code. So whether they are subsystems, whether they are interfaces, whether they are APIs, there's an agreement that we make, a set of expectations that we have in order to use a particular piece of code. And whenever we have a piece of code, we'll call it a provider, it's providing something. Whatever that interface is to interact with it, let's say it's a GET request or it's a POST request, right? Whatever that is, whatever parameters you have to put in, that is in a sense a contract. It's a set of expectations that are agreed upon, and whenever it's broken, things don't work. So if you have a client that's or a consumer that's trying to interact with your provider, and that consumer is making requests but they're not working, well, that means that that contract is broken. So contract testing is taking those places where we have interactions between a consumer and a provider and making sure that whatever it is that allows them to interact works. That's all it does. It's not there to check that the functionality is right. It's not there to check that that you can do anything you want against it. It's not there necessarily for negative testing. It's a very superficial try at making sure that the contract is right. There's a lot of stuff you don't hear me saying right now. You do not hear me saying Guys, this is the end all be all testing for everything. It'll test everything you can think of. It'll cover all of your test cases. The coverage will be 100%. I'm not saying any of that. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. This is one small piece of your entire prospect for testing an application, okay? One small piece, contract testing, although it can be extremely beneficial. So where does contract testing live? Well, it could live at a number of different places. It could live at the unit level for how two units of code interact together. It could live at the UI level and how we interact with the UI and what we expect the UI to be able to give us. What we're going to talk about today, and what most of the time is the case with contract testing, is it's at the service level. So that service level, these are your APIs, these are subroutines, pieces of code, subroutine, like I'm 100 years old, right? These are methods or functions, these are APIs, these are endpoints, these are services, that type of thing at the service level. I'm just going to check in really quick here on questions and see what we've got so far. And if there's anything that I just need to go back over. You're welcome to send me questions, but I will have to stop what I'm saying to look at them. So it might be best for me to look at the end. Contract testing. The questions we're trying to answer with contract testing: does the consumer make the expected request? Does the provider return the expected response? That's it. That's what we're trying to figure out. We're not trying to figure out, once again, we're not trying to figure out, does the consumer work in all cases? Does the provider work in all cases? Can we go end to end? I'm not interested in all those things with contract testing. We're only interested in, does the consumer make the expected requests? Does the provider return the expected responses? As I've said, not a functional test. You're going to have very few tests. When you think about what I'm telling you, you're going to have very few tests when you're in the scope of just looking at that connection, that interface between the consumer and the provider. You're going to loosely check that these are right, and you're going to have flexibility for changes. With any automation, there's only two things that we can do. This comes from Michael Feathers. He says that, number one, we can check to see if the functionality is correct in as much as we program that test automation with the proper expectations. And number two, has anything changed? With contract testing, we're testing, number one, that the requests we make will work. Number two, that the responses we make will work. So that's, does it work? That's that first thing that we can do. And number two, does it change? Has it changed? So we have flexibility for changes because we've got less tests and it's easier to make those changes. But we're going to be aware of changes when they happen without our knowledge, or when they happen when we're not looking. Pact. Pact is not my tool. Pact is an open source tool. It's out at pact.io. You can take a look anytime. In fact, we're going to go to that site in just a minute. They function in an open source way. They take donations. So if your company works with Pact, it would be great to have them create a donation to these folks to help them out. A lot of great people work on this project from what I can tell. It's going to have several components. You've got a contract testing tool, which is Pact. You've got JavaScript with Node and NPM and all that kind of stuff. You've got mocks using sign-on and a few other tools within the JavaScript world. And then you've got continuous integration. You tie this in with continuous integration in order to make sure that your contracts are always working. Your packs are always working. So let's take a look at this diagram together and just make sure that we've got our heads kind of wrapped around this first starting point, okay? So get rid of that. This is the diagram from the Pact documents. They have great documentation. And you can see several things here. Number one, you've got this consumer. In this case, they make it look like a phone. It's not necessarily a phone. It doesn't have to be a phone. It could be a website. It could be another API. It could be a lot of other things, but you've got a consumer of some sort. That consumer makes a request to a mock provider. Okay, our provider is actually over here. So our service, our API, whatever it is. So normally we wouldn't have all these steps in between, right? With pure end-to-end testing, with how we generally test manually, you interact with the consumer, it automatically ties directly to that provider. You don't have this middle layer here. And this is where the magic happens with Pact and with contract testing. The consumer makes a request over to a mock provider. Mock just means fake. So it's not the real provider, it's a fake provider. The fake provider responds with hard-coded information in one way. It responds. The consumer tests that response to make sure it got back the right thing and that there were no errors. That combination of request and response becomes a contract or part of a contract, the consumer side of a contract. The contract is an artifact that we keep that's up on a website. And I'm going to show you all of this up on a website, the Pact interface. And we see very clearly in human readable language what it is we expected the consumer to do and what response we were supposed to get back, and whether or not it worked the last time around. The second part of this is with the consumer. So we have a simulated consumer. It looks a lot like a unit test. It's not a unit test, but it's using unit test framework, Mocha in this case. So we'll use a simulated consumer, and that consumer is going to make a request to the real provider, and the real provider is going to respond. That's the second part of the contract. That's the provider side of the contract. So now we've got these two pieces. We've got what we expect from the provider and what we expect from the consumer. And together, as long as those work, we can be reasonably assured that the interaction between the consumer and the provider works. So some of you are probably saying things like, Paul, it seems really complicated to try to figure out whether or not the consumer and the provider work together. Why wouldn't you just try them together, right? I hear you. Many times these days, what we see is we see one team over in one part of the world working on a provider API, another team working on the consumer. This is one way to keep them working together. Another thing that happens with this is we have many different versions of both providers and consumers out there. The formats of requests can change anytime. The formats of responses can change anytime in a service-oriented world. And we need to know when those are working together. Chances are you don't test every single consumer. You don't test every single provider. You don't test every single combination. You don't test every single version of all of those. This is one way to make sure that all of those things work together, to make sure that they all work together in several different environments, not just in a deployed system, because how often can we deploy all of our services all the time these days? You can also test them locally, so the developer can test them locally on their systems. Testers would be able to run these locally. We can run them in CI without ever having to deploy. So there's another benefit there. Finally, we have a document that tells us exactly what that interface is supposed to be. Normally, we would probably use our tests for this, right? Or maybe Swagger or some other type of API documentation. A test would be a very good contract, but you have to know that testing tool. The testing tool has to be up to date, all those things. With this, that contract, that human readable piece of this is generated, so we don't have to keep it up to date. By coding, we keep it up to date. Developers can keep it up to date. And we have a number of other benefits as well. So take a look at Pact sometime, docs.pact.io, and I'm going to say, I'm going to put this into your chat session as well here, so you can take a look at that link whenever you want. And finally, let's do this workshop, okay? So here we go. Let's do this together. Any questions at this point? I'm going to take just a minute for a break as we're going through this. Any questions? This would be a good time to ask before we get into this. While people are typing those into the questions section, I'm going to start pulling up my environment, and I need to give you a couple of thoughts about all of this. So number one, I've got this code pulled down on my system from master, and you see a code base, and this code base is and I'm trying to read questions while I'm doing this at the same time. So I'll get a couple more questions and then read through them and come back to you guys. So you have a client section, you have a server section, you have your pacts here, logs, typical node modules. You're going to need Docker for this. I didn't mention, if you don't have Docker, you're going to need it for this to work. And you also see a README file here. This README file is going to be very helpful to you. So it should look like this when you actually if you've got the ability to look at that. You can also look at it just on GitLab and see the README there. I've gone through here and hopefully given plenty of credit. Tomas Kadlekasik, I don't know his last name, Shadow Beetle, over on GitHub, wrote the original example of this. I just found out about that the other day, that this was derivative. This workshop was derivative from that. This is a workshop that one of my folks built, and I only had time to start looking at it and realize that it was derivative recently. So thank you very much, Tomas. I want to give you all the credit in the world for doing the hard work on this. You can also go in and donate to Pact here, and a little bit of information about us. You've got some prereqs that I mentioned, Docker, NPM, JQ, and you've got information about installing those if you go out and look those things up. If you're trying to start doing all of that right now, chances are you're not going to be able to keep up with this. So setup is here. You can start running through that. I'll make a note here. My version of NPM and the packages in here, I just found out yesterday, they're very far behind. They're very old. So you're going to come up, you're going to run this, and it's probably going to say like 24 vulnerabilities. Don't worry about them. We're not running production code. Just do the NPMI. Don't worry about that particular issue. I did try to go back and update this. I just didn't have time to make it all work with the updates, and you can expect an update pretty soon from me on that in this repo. And if you'd rather do the update and make a merge request, that would be fine too. I'm going to read some questions. It sounds like all this could still be achieved in unit tests. So a developer may use something like mock for the external service. I probably misunderstood through the main benefit of contract testing. That's exactly right, Prob. Prob is the name of the person asking this. You could do this through unit testing. In fact, we do this through unit testing. We also do it through end-to-end testing. We do it a lot of other ways. Let me get into the demo. I think you'll start seeing a few of the differences, but that's a wonderful question. Absolutely. Sunjana asks, does the mock provider delay responses? We don't, I haven't gotten into that. It uses sign-on, and sign-on has a lot of ability for doing special things with mocks and whatever. So you could look into the sign-on documentation for that. But the actual behaviors of the system is not so much what we're looking for with this right now, and we're not looking for Pact to show us different behaviors. We're looking for Pact to give us a great way to show that interaction and whether or not our consumer does what our provider expects and our provider does what our consumer expects, and that we've got a really clear visualization of that contract, that agreement between the two. So I'm going to do one more of these. Yeah, so if you don't have Docker knowledge, you're going to have to go back and get Docker installed and just have a tiny bit of knowledge, enough to install it, and these scripts will do the rest for you, Rita. And let's see, can you simulate connection problems with Pact? Once again, Kia, I appreciate the question. That's a great question. That's not what Pact is for. We're not here to simulate connection problems. We're not here to test in real time. We're here to test prior to deployment. We're here to test really more at development time or pre-deployment time. So we're not using Pact to simulate real connections. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that the way that we request things is what we expect from the provider, and the provider is responding the way that we would expect with the consumer. But I understand your question, wanting to do that, absolutely. So let's dig in here. So I've given you a little bit of an update on what is what's in the README. I've already installed all these things, so I'm not going to do that. I've got a terminal down here in the directory where I've done my clone. You can see that that's the same directories here. If you're not familiar with this tool, this is VS Code, freely available from Microsoft. Pretty decent set of, it's a good tool. It's good IDE for a lot of reasons. It's got a lot of extensions you can add on as well for all different things. It is something that's functional for me right now. Plenty of other ways you can do this as well if you have other preferences. So I'm going to do this exactly like the setup, and you can follow along if you happen to be getting set up right now. NPMI, that's going to go through. NPM is Node Package Manager. Node is a JavaScript interpreter. It's based on the interpreter that's in Chrome, I believe. It may be the engine for Chrome JavaScript interpreter. I'm not quite clear on exactly all the ties there, but the package manager just manages all the dependencies that we need in order to run this example. The I stands for install. So you see it's going through and doing an install right now of the dependencies that I need. I ran into a couple of problems with this when I was doing it. One was that I needed to update my Xcode, and that's not always easy or Xcode command line tools, but it's clearly done that now. I'm okay now. You'll see 28 vulnerabilities. This is what I was talking about. We have some old code here. I couldn't get it all fixed before this, but I gave it a good shot. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start the Pact broker. Or the first thing we're going to do. We've installed properly, and I'm going to do npm run Pact broker. You know what I'm going to do also? Just remember this. So one thing is I'm going to turn off my screenshot here, okay, my video, and leave you guys with only the screen. And what I'm hoping is that you have a little more space and you can see a little bit more. If you're having trouble seeing this, let me know and I'll try to make the fonts a little bigger. I'm not sure if I could do that quickly right now. npm run pact-broker. So I'm going to run that command. And this actually runs a Docker command, you may notice down here. So it's going to start a Pact broker, which is a little web server on my system. It's going to have it run on port 8080, and it's going to start it up. So if you're not familiar with Docker, on Mac these days, you have this nice dashboard that comes along with Docker. If you didn't see that, or if you weren't able to see that, I went to Docker up here in my, what is this thing called? My top bar up at the top of the screen. And I went down to dashboard, and that brought up this. And you'll see a couple of things. So yours is going to be named something different. Your container's named something different. It comes up with its own random kind of name for each of these. But what you should see is this rising stack / pact_broker _ example. And it should be running. So we see running on port 8080. So what does that mean? Well, some of you know, hey, that means we need to go look at what's running on port 8080, localhost : 8080. So if you look there, you can see what that web server is sharing with us. It's sharing pacts with us. This is the interface for the contracts that I was talking about, the interface for Pact. We've already got one contract set up. That contract is between a consumer called ZooApp and a provider called Animal Service. You can click on these and get a little bit of information about the relationship between the service and the consumer. It gives us this nice pretty arrow, okay, and the green part is what we're looking at there. And then it shows the same the other way around, okay, or green I guess is the consumer and orange is the provider. You can create webhooks. You can get a lot more information about the provider here if you need it. But the main thing, and completely overly understated in this UI, is this icon that looks a little bit like a contract. So if you click on that and you go in here, you get something human readable, okay? Kind of interesting. So we know that this ZooApp, this service, is version 1.0.2. We know the date that it was published, 2016. Whoa, that's old. Paul, you got to get up to speed, man. View in browser API. So you could click here and view what we just saw, right, with all the information about making a request. And we've got a very clear set of tests or contracts. So we see the requests from ZooApp to the animal service, a request for an alligator, given there is an alligator named Mary. So if we click on that, it's just going to slide down to this first interaction here. Okay, it just came down here. Given there is an alligator named Mary, I don't know who names their alligators Mary. Upon receiving a request for an alligator from ZooApp with, and this is your request, so we know the method is get, the path is here, blah, blah, blah. Animal service will respond with this, okay? So that's one item out of our contract, just one piece of our contract, that if we make this request, we should get back this response, okay? And you see all of them listed here in different ways. So you're welcome to go out and check that out. But with that little work, we've already got this built-in app that we talked about, and we show a few of these requests and what we would expect back from the server. I'm just going to check in real quick on questions. Nice. It's easily readable for me. That's right. Me too, Kia. So we've done this step. We've got the broker set up and running. And we've taken a look at localhost 8080. So before we get started, a couple things just to kind of set a baseline for what this demo is going to do. Number one, we have the tests. So these contracts are actually tests, and we have consumer tests. So to run those consumer tests here locally, I do npm run test dash consumer. And I may have a little more output on my screen than you do. I had some debugging on earlier. But we see this looks a lot like Mocha, and that's because it is Mocha. Okay, so the output is formatted like that. We can see our tests. So we have get all products is one of them, get products is one of them, register products is one of them. And with each of these, so get all products should get product list from server. I know that's hard to read. Get products should return product list based on query. Register product should send product registration request. So these are new tests that we just ran for the first time. They're ones that were not up on the server. In order to get them on that server, we publish our packs. So this is like as if I had just written those tests. And I'm going to show you where those tests are in just a minute. Actually, why don't I do it now? These are client tests. So inside client, you've got this client spec, client.spec.js. And you see all the tools I mentioned, chai, sign on. And then here you have your tests. So before each, after each, and then you've got your typical describe, get all products. This is your test. This is what's going to create this contract, okay? In this case, this is not the animals service that we were looking at just a minute ago. This is a different service with a different consumer. We're calling one client and we're calling one product service, I believe. Yeah, products service. So this is the spec, this is the test for all of the requests. And we see down here, we get the get products here, we see in the output, get products, that's what we ran. We see this particular test case or spec, it should return product list based on query, and we see should return product list based on query down here, okay? So that's what ran, and they all passed. That's why they're green and it says 3 passing here. So those are our client tests. There are 3 in this file. You can look at those as much as you like. You've got the code base now, or you can get it when you're ready. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to publish our contracts. So we've got these tests. Let's publish them out to that website that we saw earlier, that interface. Once again, I may have a little more output than you have because I've been playing with the output here. But that's basically it. You would see this. You would see client tasks published as packs, I guess, and a little bit of this output. But we published this new contract. So let's go look at our Pact interface. I'm going to refresh and look at that. So we still have the zoo app and the animal service, and we have those contracts. We now have client and product service that we just published from those tests that I showed you. So inside here, client, product, service, you've got requests from client to product service. You can look at what those are. Given it has one product, upon receiving a request to create a new product from client with this request, product service will respond with this, okay? And there are 3 different ones here. You can look through those all you'd like. So we didn't create any tests. I showed you where they were. We published the tests that we had. This is kind of like preamble to getting into actually writing one of these, which is what we're going to do with the last 20 minutes or so here. But we can also run the provider tests. So if you're up to this step, if you didn't run publish packs, this next one will not work, okay? So this next step is npm run test dash provider. And when I run that, I get some output. Once again, my output may look a little bit different than yours. I can see the requests, the responses, and I can see once again, test case is very similar to what I saw before. Given it has multiple products with different prices, a request is a request to retrieve multiple product list filtered by price with get blah, 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 max min price 2, max price 5, returns a response which gives these three responses, okay? These three items, I guess, or products. So what is that? I know I haven't explained this very well. There's a test products service in here. If you look inside your code base and you notice inside the server section, there are consumer tests for the product service. And these look a little different. All of this looks a little different. This is how the products are going to be created. The products are defined inside this model. So there's a model here. It has some methods on it for how we work through this together. I'm not going to dive too deep into this. You have your product service in here as well. So this is where you've got you're actually creating those endpoints. And then we created an Express app is how we're displaying all this. So it's all there. You can look through it and try to understand what's going on. We can verify the packs as well. So part of what's going on is verifying that the packs run. But this product test service is key in this. So we talked a little bit about the products service, the provider. We talked a little bit about the consumer and how that's set up. I haven't given you a clear indication of exactly how that works because that's what we're going to do next. Yeah, so if you're trying to follow along, you may, yes, if you don't have JQ installed, you're going to need to install JQ. Absolutely, you can use any IDE you'd like, video. If you want to use IntelliJ, you're more than welcome to use IntelliJ. Pact is not constrained by a particular IDE. Simon, let's see. Simon asks about how do you make a request when those requests may need to be authenticated first. I'm not getting into that here. These are all unauthenticated requests. Does it only work with port 8080 or can it be changed? Absolutely, Sunjana. The port can be changed. That's really just the setup on Docker and which port you'd like to expose. You can expose whatever port you'd like through Docker, through your Docker setup. And whatever code you write like this is going to have to know that, of course. But yeah, use whichever you want. Great questions. Keep them coming. Can I use Java instead of JavaScript? I don't think so. I have not seen Java support for Pact. That would be in the support documentation for Pact. We're using JavaScript today, and the places where I've seen Pact used so far, it has all been JavaScript. So let's get back into this. All right, so let's get into the real part of the workshop here, the meat of the workshop. Once again, anytime you can go out and do this yourself. Here is our exercise. We're going to create a pact for getting a product by ID. Now, you guys remember we had 3 particular requests. We have a request to create a new product, a request to retrieve a list of products, a request to retrieve a product list filtered by price. What we don't have up there, we don't have a request to get a product by ID, right? Right. That's what we're going to create. So let's create it. So first step is we're going to open up client. Here, I'm going to close this down to make it more clear. We're going to open up client.spec.js. I mentioned this is where the specs are for the client side or the consumer side. So we go in here and we notice, hey, these are tests just like we would expect. Here's our first test suite. It's describe get all products. We're going to put another test suite in here at the same level as these describes. So I'm going to make sure that I have space here at line 78 just after that. Make sure that I've got my curlies and my parentheses all lined up just right to make sure we don't make a silly copy paste error. Then I'm just going to copy this code in step 1 and paste it here at line 79. And I'm going to save. So if you take a quick look at this, we're talking about get by ID, right? That's what we said we were going to create. So we're going to try to make a request with get by ID. The next step, we're going to go into our mocks.js. So where we actually created the mock provider. Remember in our description here, we said with the consumer, and that's what we're doing right now, we're creating a consumer side of a contract. With a consumer, you create a mock provider, right? So how do we create that? That's what we're doing right now, a mock provider. So I'm going to grab this code, copy, and I'm going to go right over into expectation, into mocks.js, and put it in the right place. So the right place will be, you notice here we've got our experts. These are our actual API endpoints from the mock is setting up, okay? And this is how we set up the fake response. So there's the one for get product list. That's why we see exactly this information when we're running our tests. You see the get filtered product list. We remember that because we did it with, remember that was the one where we had to use a price and a number or something along those lines, a price and something else, and then register product, that was creating a product. So we need another one, and it looks like it should belong right here on line 84. So that I put it right there after that curly brace, and it pasted all of this in. So now we've got get by ID. So this is what we would be writing if we were writing the mock part for the endpoint get by ID, or the mock endpoint for get by ID. So we've got a state, and you notice this language looks a little familiar, okay? This is where we're actually putting the language in that's going to create that contract that we see on the website when we go look there, okay? So a product with ID of 1 is created, a request to retrieve product by ID. Here's your method, here's your path. We're going to ask for ID 1, or rather that's the path we're expecting them to ask with 1. And then we're just going to return with this response here, the product ID body and status of 200. So I'm going to make sure to save all these as I go along. I forget to save sometimes, and I don't want to mess this up. So that's all we needed to do to create the consumer side test, or the consumer side of the contract, okay? We created our test case here with putting this into the client.spec.js. Then in here, we created the mock endpoint, get by ID. All right. Next step, run the consumer test. Anybody remember how to do that? Well, Paul, you've got it right there highlighted, and it's in my history. npm run test-consumer. So if you remember, last time we had 3 passing tests. We had get all products, get products, register product, and now we have get by ID, and it should return the product based on ID. And it did, our test passed. So we've added one of those. So the next step is we could go in and look and see what Pact created when we ran that test. So inside client product service.json, you would see this section now in there. And it has all the information that we added into our test case. So you could go in and take a look at that if you wanted to. The next step, if we want to see this out on our website, well, we got to publish to the Pact website, right? So let's go in and look at this. I'm just going to do, hopefully you can still see, yeah, you can still see my screen. Just sanity check here, okay? I'm going to go back. I like sanity, I like small steps. So the last time we published was 9 minutes ago. Sounds about right. I can go in here and look at this. There are only 3 requests. We know which ones they are. So let's go back, run our publish command, which is npm run publish-pacts. I'm going to hit enter there. And you see the output that we saw before. Once again, I've got some debugging on that you all may not have on. And it should have worked. It looks like it worked. So let's go take a look at this. I'm going to refresh this page. Still have just the 2 things here. Last verified, interesting. And if we go in here, we can see that we have a change and that we've added a 4th one in here. And it was request to retrieve product by ID, given a product with ID of 1 is created. So this is the one that we created. I just clicked on that. It says given a product with ID of 1 is created, upon receiving a request to retrieve product by ID from client with this request. Product service will respond with this. So that is the contract that we would expect, the consumer side contract. Is it testing the provider right now? No. No. It's testing the consumer, that the consumer has done what we expected, that the format of that call is correct. Once again, if you're joining us late, this is not an end-all be-all testing solution. This doesn't do end-to-end testing. We don't do negative test casing with this. We're not doing boundary conditions. We're not doing any of all that wonderful stuff that we know that we need to do as testers. We're simply testing that what we expect in the request to a service and what we respond with in the response from a service are what we would expect. That's all we're doing here. That's what contract testing is. So we could see that it was there. We noticed that there were changes to that website. And when we clicked on the page icon, we saw the new contract with all this information in it. We can add the provider test now on the test products service. So let's do the provider side, okay? So number one, we need this case inside the test products service. So we're gonna look down here in the switch statement. We see we've got a case for it has one product. We have a case for it has multiple products with different prices. We're gonna add a case in right here. That's just the one that I copied from the README. And I'm taking that semicolon off there. You may have noticed that just to make sure that it's exactly like all the others. The semicolon should be no problem, but I'm just, I like uniformity sometimes. So cool. So we added that in, and what that's going to do is it's going to create one more response for us, one more product. And then we're going to run the test provider. So we should have an extra test case here. If you remember, we had 3 interactions before, now we have 4. And my output is pretty screwed up because, once again, I've got that debugging on. But you can look through your output, see that a little bit better. So those are each of our provider tests running. So that's that. That's how we do that. That's how we create a contract test. I don't think it adds anything new on if we publish again. Just thinking about that as we're sitting here. Let me just see. Okay, so it saw that we published and updated that. Here's the product by ID. Product service we'll respond with. That's our response. Yeah, cool. So that's a little bit about Pact and a little bit about how to do that. I've got an extra credit there. If you'd like to go through and do it, you're more than welcome to. So when you get a chance, challenge extra credit, create a new Pact test for deleting a product. Deleting, and that should be deleting a product. I'll have to fix that too. And extra credit, create a new Pact test for updating a product. So 2 different things you can do there. Normally when I'm teaching this part of a course, we do this challenge. So I'll go through all this to just say, hey, this is how Pact works. This is how you would do it. This is how you can be familiar with the pieces of what we're doing here. Now go through and do this on your own. And that's what this next section would be about. So you're welcome to do that anytime. Questions, I'm totally open to questions now. I'm hoping I can keep up with all these questions. There's a bunch of them here. Start typing them in. Once again, my name is Paul Merrill. I really appreciate you guys all being here and being a part of this. I've got a couple more things to go through here as we finish up, but I'm going to answer a few questions. We've got about 12 minutes left. So, and I'm getting to where I have to take my glasses off much more often, so forgive me with that. Oh, and so this is Ezekiel, and he mentions, yes, Pact works in Java. We're using Java consumer providers. There's a lot of documentation about this in the official Pact website. There's your answer for video. Thank you very much, Ezekiel. I appreciate that. And Bruce mentions it supports several different languages, and he even gives me a link here, which just makes everything better. So let's go look at that together. Here we go. JavaScript, Java, JVM is Java Virtual Machine, .NET, Go, Python, Consumer, Swift, Scala, PHP, Ruby. Awesome. Some wonderful stuff there. Thank you very much, Bruce. What is the mock framework? So I believe it's sign-on is what's being used. And you notice in here with the mocks, let's see. Somewhere in here we had it. There we go, sign on. I believe that's what's being used. Can we see the verification result in Pact Broker? Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure how that part of this works, how it actually displays the difference. I guess we could break one of these and we could look at it. So why don't we do that? It says verified. So let's go back here and look at, this is a really good question. Who is this? Aphilesh. And of course I should have been prepared for this. So let's look at this one and let's give back. How do we do this? Let's change the method that we use on that one and see if we get it broken, okay? So this is in the instance where we've got a developer who's gone in and they've been working with some code. They thought, oh, it'll be fine to change this, or they weren't even thinking about whatever it is we were trying to do here. And inside this get all products, they said, oops, I don't like the way that looks. I don't know. Why can't I just go to that? Go to definition, go to implementations. Let's try that. And where am I? Okay, get all products. String, use products. You know what? I wonder if I'm going to be able to do this live. Get all products. So there's our request. What could I change? Let's just change something different then. Let's just change this and say they accidentally deleted those 2 letters, okay? And then if we run the consumer, we should get a failure here. There it is. Type verification failed, expected interactions did not match actual. And what I'm thinking is that this would run in CI on a system somewhere, and you would then, it would automatically publish to your container that's running this little Express server or this little server here. And so I just did a publish like that CI system would do. And I'm going to refresh here. I thought I did a publish. Why does it say 6 minutes ago? Try it again. Let me just see here. 6 minutes ago. I'm not sure why it says 6 minutes, but let's take a look here. Okay, and it does say that it changed. And I don't see all of the interactions. It's strange. I'm not sure how that works. I'll have to learn more about that and figure out how exactly that works. But we don't see all of the requests here, and I'm wondering if that's because they failed or because they just wouldn't work with the service side. Let's see. What other questions do we have here? So where would contract testing sit within the testing development lifecycle? And this is from Daniel, and he says it's a repeat of his question. So Daniel, I apologize, I missed your question earlier. I won't be able to answer every question, you guys, and I will miss some of them. So this is a good question though. So where would it sit? Well, number one, I don't know what your life cycle is. In a traditional world, you would have development happens for a while, and then you've got testing that happens. In an agile world, which is actually becoming more the tradition these days, then you've got hopefully development testing going on at the same time, interlocked, in sync, and we even have tests written before code is written, which is a wonderful, wonderful place to be, to write code as a developer and see it turn green as soon as you plug it in to as soon as you push it. That's a wonderful place to be. So where does it sit in that world? Well, number one, those are 2 different worlds, I guess. I would see this fitting in within the development world for the most part. Developers are mostly going to write your contract tests, It is highly, it's technical, right? I mean, and technical is probably not the right word, but there's a lot of programming and a lot of nuance and a lot of understanding setup and a lot of operations and those types of things. So generally, it's going to take someone with pretty strong programming, JavaScript, operations, DevOps type of understanding of how to do it. So where would this sit? Number one, it sits in terms of who owns it and who writes it. Usually it's going to be developers. There are some cases, and I know several companies, where testers write these and test automation engineers write these, or SDETs write these and know how to implement them. Different pieces of this may fit into different roles and responsibilities. In terms of process, if you're in a traditional world where you've got a lot of development going on and then testing afterward, I would see this in that development part along with unit tests. That'd probably be a preferred place. And then within an agile process, it would be right there in the middle of your work. So in fact, I think it'd be highly helpful to have this written prior to code being written and use the same mocks and the same process for writing that out. You could write out all the consumers, for instance, if the service isn't there, and have it ready to go once the service is there. So where does it sit? It really depends on your world and how things work in your world. Yeah, and someone else mentioned about recordings. Absolutely, this is being recorded and it will be available at the very same place that you came for this webinar, the very same place. So go to the very same link and you'll find it, or you can go to beaufortfairmont.com/webinars, and we have all of them there, all the recordings from the last 4 years, and you're welcome to find those there. So here we go, a little bit more reading, if you want to do more reading. Really appreciate all of the information out on the Pact site. Really good documentation there. This is a little bit different, guys. Contract testing, a little bit different idea. It's not as holistic as we may want as testers. I think a lot of times we want a full suite of solutions, a full suite of tests that test everything. There is a value in testing pieces and in testing how pieces go together. And if you haven't discovered that value yet, that's okay. But just because you haven't discovered it doesn't mean throw out the techniques, throw out the skills. This is a new skill. You can use it and see the value later on. Work with your developers to use it maybe in an experimentation. We love experimentation. And see how it works for you, what value they see in it, okay? So great, thank you all very much for being here. Once again, if you've got jobs where you're trying to fill, we would love to help you out. We've got several of them going on right now. If you are the right person for that web performance role or that architect for robot framework, please give me a yell. I also need, I need some software engineers for a couple of places. And I also need a couple of test automation engineers, which you can go to the very same place, beaufortfairmont.com, go to the About box and do improve your work life. And we would love to help you do that. So thank you very much for being here. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for your participation. And I look forward to seeing you next time at beaufortfairmont.com's webinars. Thank you and have a good day.